So again, my name is Wendy Folks. If you joined us late, I work for the Nature Conservancy, and the Fire Adapted Communities Learning Network is a joint project of the Nature Conservancy and the Watershed Center. With funding from the USDA Forest Service and the Department of the Interior. Thank you very much for creating profiles on our website and for getting on the phone today. So chances are that if you signed up to be affiliated with the FAC Learning Network, FAC being Fire Adapted Communities, you already know a little bit about what that means. But just to make sure we're all on the same page with what we're trying to do, I'm going to spend the next several minutes reviewing some FAC principles. And one thing to keep in mind is that FAC is an evolving concept. There are a lot of smart people out there thinking about how to best approach our wildfire problem, looking at it through a resilience lens. And there are new papers coming out all the time, and then our members are testing some of these concepts on the ground, and so there's a lot of learning going on. And when I give this presentation a year from now, it will probably be a bit different, and that's okay. I also wanted to say that really what we're about at our core is improving wildfire outcomes. So if you take home just two things from my presentation, and now I'm trying to switch it. Oh, Emily is still the presenter. There we go. If you take away just two things from my presentation, please remember, number one, that Fire Adapted Communities is not just a new name for FireWise. If you're like me and you're trying to spread the word about what FAC means, you've probably encountered a lot of people who have that notion or who ask you that question. And it's nothing against FireWise. FireWise is really important to what we do. It's just that FAC is just a whole lot more. And then secondly, Fire Adapted Communities is not just a collection of programs or a checklist. So some of you may have seen this diagram before. We call it the sunrise diagram. This was one of the first communication tools developed to try to convey what FAC means. And I think it was somewhat useful, but it does give one the impression that here are these things that you have to do in order to become a fire-adapted community. And it doesn't quite work that way. Every community is different, and not all of these approaches work necessarily in every place. There's no order in which things necessarily have to happen. Basically, there's no recipe. So next slide. There we go. This diagram takes a different approach to describing what a fire-adapted community might look like, and does a good job of conveying that FAC is not just about homeowners taking action. It's about everybody taking action. Everyone has a role to play, and that's a key concept for fire-adapted communities. Here's yet another diagram. This one conveys that fire-adapted communities is more than just mitigation. It's about taking action before, during, and after fire. And another thing you might take away from this diagram is that fire-adapted communities sort of cuts across all three goals of the cohesive strategy. If you're familiar with the cohesive strategy, those goals are fire-adapted communities, safe and effective response, and resilient ecosystems. So I've already touched on a few of these points. Fire-adapted communities is both a process and a long-term goal. you really never reach fire-adapted community status. It's always a continual process, and that's because fire-adapted community practitioners recognize that we're working in a dynamic world. Things are always changing, and so we're always adjusting, and so you're never really finished with the work. Another key concept is the need to rethink how communities relate to fire. So to fundamentally change how in the U.S. The dynamic that we have with trying to, with seeing fire as the danger and always having to put it out and seeing it as a negative. Sorry, my computer's being kind of slow here. There we go. Here's some other names for FAC. Sustainable coexistence with wildfire, community wildfire resilience, and living with fire. And then just a word about resilience. You know, there are a lot of definitions of resilience. Basically, it's about the capacity of a system to bounce back, or in some cases, bounce forward after experiencing stresses or shocks. And as I said a minute ago, inherent in this thinking is the need to continually adapt because this system, the context in which we work, is not static. And as many of you probably know, there's a global community disaster resilience movement that's applying resilience thinking and principles to helping communities withstand a variety of different disasters. And we see ourselves in the network as part of that global movement. So what are some essential ingredients of fire-adapted communities? One of them is community engagement. Another one is stakeholder collaboration, shared responsibility, strategies that work at different scales, and as I've said, continual adaptation. This is a screenshot from an older version of our fire-adapted communities self-assessment tool, and this is a tool that we've designed in order to help communities with this continual adaptation piece. So we've talked about some essential elements of fire-adapted communities. What are some potential approaches and strategies? Well, here we are back on the sunrise diagram, and a suite of these strategies are shown here. There are probably some that are missing, and as I said, not all of these are appropriate everywhere. Next, I'm going to talk a little bit about outcomes of employing fire-adapted community principles or concepts in a place. One thing I wanted to convey is that these outcomes manifest at different scales. So at the scale of your community, when you start working toward fire adaptation, you begin to see stronger connections between people and organizations, and this is key to helping communities become more resilient to all sorts of disasters or stresses, not just wildfire. And then another thing that you start to see is infrastructure in your community that's ready for fire. And then looking a little more broadly, maybe just outside of town, there are changes there too. Your natural areas are more ready for fire. And then again, thinking at a somewhat larger scale, when you have those pieces in place, fire is increasingly able to play its natural role, and we have better wildfire outcomes on the land. And then this is the prize. You know, hopefully at larger and larger scales in our country, we'll see healthier economies and ecosystems and a decreasing need for suppression resources. I was just in Washington this week at a meeting with some green infrastructure folks that the Forest Service convened to try and think about disaster resilience and wildfires. And those folks were really surprised to learn about the situation that the Forest Service is in and how much of their budget they spend on fires and what that trajectory looks like. So that's yet another outcome that we're all striving for.